second tutorial, we'll be discussing the midah, the trait of generosity, or nidivut. I'll be doing a brief introduction to acquaint you with the midah, with the trait of generosity. We will then be doing several text studies from among my favorite text studies on this topic, and I'll be giving you some pointers on how to work with your groups in terms of facilitating the discussion on this midah. Finally, I will close with some suggested practices from the practice section at the back of the curriculum booklet. The Hebrew word nidivut comes from nun dalet vav, a three-letter root, which has to do with willingness. Nidivut is about the heart. It's about opening our hearts up so that we give fully and willingly. Nidivut is not only about giving from the heart, but giving a part of our heart itself. Giving in this way enhances who we are. The adage, the more we give, the more we receive, is what generosity, nidivut, is all about. Nidivut is about more than giving materially or financially. It refers to being generous or being forgiving. We must give of our time or our energy as well. For some people, generosity becomes a spiritual practice. Much like a spiritual practice of meditation or prayer or chant, nidivut can be a spiritual practice in which the person proactively seeks out opportunities to give of themselves to many people regularly. In other words, they seek out opportunities to practice by repetition, achieving mastery at this trait or midah. Additionally, consider in times of panic, illness, impending storms, how our instinct may be to hoard needed supplies of food. How can we make a practice of buying and keeping on hand only what we need? Unlike tzedakah, which is a Jewish commandment or obligation rooted in the concept of justice or tzedek, nidivut, generosity, comes freely from one's open heart and goes beyond the minimum that justice might require financially or emotionally. We continue with our text study. Let's turn to our texts. I focus on three of my favorite texts and how to work with them in your groups. Remember some key points when doing text study and conversation. You, the facilitator, may need to be the one to begin the conversation with a personal sharing related to the question posed. Your willingness to share will hopefully encourage others in your group to share as well. Remember, silence is okay, and let yourself sit with the silences. Our first text is text 1. I refer you to text 1 in the booklet, and text 1 tells us there are three kinds of generosity. Generosity with money, generosity with one's deeds, and generosity with one's wisdom. And all three of these are found in our patriarch, Abraham. This is a great text and a great exercise because it allows not only for full group discussion, but also for a breaking down into smaller groups or pairs, depending on the size of your group. The text calls for a discussion of types of generosity and for a self-reflection in which area each person is more generous. Are they more generous with money, with wisdom, or with the deeds? The large group sharing is followed by small group work, addressing two specific questions, with other areas of personal generosity listed in the booklet that will add to this conversation. Text 1 and its exercises allow for a lot of flexibility. It is a long exercise, and you may need to omit one of the others if the discussion on text 1 really takes off. Our next selected text is text 3. This text says, accustom yourself to finding satisfaction in acting kindly toward others and in seeing the meanness of being stingy. Sometimes we are stingy, And there are situations in terms of self-preservation that may require us to be stingy. The exercises that accompany this text challenge us to look at these situations. Encourage your group members to remember when this might have been the way they responded to being less than so. An important factor to remember and to point out in your discussion is that all of the Mussar Midot should be evaluated along a continuum, and that we're always looking for the right balance in Mussar between the two extremes, too little or too extreme. Our last selected text is text 4, and this is a text from Benjamin Disraeli, twice former Prime Minister of Great Britain. It tells us the greatest good we can do for another is not just to share your riches, but to reveal to a person his own. This is a great text for group sharing and discussion, and you can focus on how people interpret the word riches and what riches of their own people have shared with other people and how they have done this, and what riches people have received from others and how those riches were shared with them. Truly a, quote, rich, unquote, conversation. The practices section of our generosity booklet suggests a range of practices you can encourage participants to try in order to develop their own individual generosity practice. I'll briefly focus on a few of the selected practices. Making a commitment to doing up to 3 generous acts a day is a great beginning level practice. You have an option of doing up to 3 generous acts, which means you can do 1 a day or more and decide how long you would like to try this practice for. Perhaps a week, perhaps longer. If you keep a written record or journal of the acts you do each day, you can track your progress over time. And this is a way of training yourself that it's okay to look at the world through a wider lens of generosity. It's there, you can refer back to the journal, and you can check your progress along the way. Another great generosity practice is one that is a movement practice. As a meditation for this midah, participants should visualize open hands, held up and out in an act of generosity. Or one could sit in contemplation with one's hands held out as such. Facilitators should practice this body stance with your group and encourage people to follow through with the practice, whichever way they're going to use their hands to open in generosity. Ideally, this practice should be done for a month, but realistically, for as often as one is able to do so. Finally, my favorite practice in the practice section is that of keeping a journal about what your parents and grandparents have modeled and taught about generosity. As you were growing up, what did you see? What examples did they model? Were they generous with money, with deeds, or with wisdom? How have you tried to pass that legacy along to your own children or to your own grandchildren? Wishing you much success on your generosity practice.